So, today is the last week of our Sermons by Request series, so it seemed fitting that we talk about the last book of the Bible. It's written as a vision, and it often reads as a nightmare. If God is peace and love, then Revelation seems to reveal a God who is a cosmic warrior, engaged in a life and death battle for the universe with the forces of evil. Since most people don't read the book of Revelation, I'm going to give you a brief sketch of the whole thing right now. The book starts with Christ's angels sending messages to 7 churches in what is now Turkey. We heard a little bit of the start of that from John's initial reading. Next, John, the writer of Revelation, is invited in a vision to enter heaven. Here he sees God's throne surrounded by martyrs and heavenly beings and angels. Christ then appears as the Lamb that was slain and breaks open 7 scrolls that have seals. So 7 seals are broken by Christ. 4 horsemen appear to deliver a series of natural disasters to the world. Famines, plagues, falling stars, the moon turns red. When the 7th seal is broken, trumpets sound and asteroids and comets strike the earth. Satan emerges from the abyss as a dragon with 7 heads. He's joined by a beast from the sea and one from the land. The sea beast, which lumbers out of the water, also has 7 heads. And they together mislead all the non-Christians of the world into worshiping them. Christ then appears on a cloud to wage war against the beast and Satan. Angels bring bowls of wrath, which are poured onto the world, hurting those who follow Satan. Kings who follow Satan, so these are the leaders of the countries, gather at a place called Armageddon to have one last battle with God's forces. And they lose the war against Christ and Christ's angels. The satanic city, the world capital in Revelation, is called Babylon the Great. You may have heard of the whore of Babylon. Well, that's the name of the great city that rules the world. It is defeated by God's forces. Satan is thrown into the abyss for 1,000 years. And during that 1,000 years, Christ reigns peacefully with all of the people who have been allowed to stay alive, who are, of course, all devout Christians in the way this book goes. After 1,000 years, Satan escapes briefly, during which there is another battle, but he's defeated and thrown into the abyss and all of his followers forever. The abyss is sealed up and they will just burn in the fiery lake. Christ judges the living and the dead, and then a new heaven and a new earth are created. The heavenly city descends to the earth, and it is peaceful and joyful. There are trees along a great river. It sounds like Eden as a city. There's 4 great rivers, and there's trees full of healing. The tree of life is everywhere. And there's no need of a temple because you can just see God walking by. Humanity and God are once again back on the same level, enjoying the same world. The fall, which started in Eden in the Bible, has now been fully reversed and has ended. That's the New Testament's vision of how the world will end. It is very, very trippy. At times, it seems like a Godzilla movie on acid. It is so weird. It was written at a time when Christianity was a tiny, tiny splinter movement off of Judaism. It was written around the year 100 to 120, and scholars suspect that there's maybe 10,000 Christians in the whole world at that point. They were subject to regular waves of persecution by the Roman Empire, often ending in torture and execution. Writing down a criticism of the Roman state could easily get them arrested, so to express their criticism of the Roman Empire, they did it in code. They borrowed images from the Hebrew Scriptures, specifically the book of Daniel. You remember Daniel in the lion's den? Well, he also wrote an apocalyptic vision of how the world was going to end. And Revelation borrows liberally from the book of Daniel. It reads like it's original, but if you know your Hebrew Scriptures, as I mentioned last week, it's important to know the Hebrew Scriptures when you read the New Testament. Revelation is based on Daniel's vision. The horsemen of the apocalypse come from there. The beasts come from there. And in Daniel's vision, it is made very, very clear that the beast represents a human empire. It explicitly tells you that this beast is allegorical. It's not a Godzilla creature. It's actually a symbol for a human empire. In Revelation, that same code is borrowed and adapted. So Babylon the Great is the city of Rome, which of course was the capital of the Roman Empire at that time. To the Christians, it's the unholy capital of the world. It is the center of paganism. The Roman emperor calls himself a god, and many Caesars before and after him will do the same. So anytime the Christians talk about the Roman Empire, they're talking about a competing worldwide religion that has millions and millions of followers, which they consider both misleading and corrupt. In Revelation, that beast that comes out of the water, as well as Satan, we're told that it has 7 heads. This isn't some flight of fancy. It's an allegorical symbol. If you go to Rome today and you pick up a tourist brochure, the first thing you're going to read is that ancient Rome was founded on 7 hills. So when it says 7 heads, it actually means the 7 hills of Rome. It's just its way of saying that beast and Satan, that's Rome. The text imagines that in the end times, Rome has taken over the world, which of course it had at that point. The known world had been taken over by Rome. And it had convinced all non-Christians to follow its sinful ways and worship its emperors as gods. All of that was actually factually true in the early 2nd century. This is very important. Revelation is not talking about some distant future. It's talking about what was happening right when it was written. The Roman Empire is seen as evil. It persecutes Christians, so they imagine God defeating that empire and rescuing the Christians, who only numbered in the thousands. One of the most famous images from Revelation is this idea of the number of the beast is 666. In ancient Hebrew, which the writer of Revelation would have been very familiar with, the Hebrew language didn't have numbers. It didn't have 1, 2, 3, 4. They used their alphabet to double as numbers. So their first letter of the alphabet for them would be the number 1. The second bit would be the number 2. And after a bunch of letters, after 10 letters, then they got into the tens and then the hundreds. So they could actually use their letters to make calculations. 666 spelled out the name Nero Caesar. Emperor Nero had been the head of the Roman Empire when the city of Rome burned. You know, he's famous for having fiddled through the burning of Rome, right? That Nero, well, he was accused of negligence for allowing Rome to burn. So rather than take the blame, he decided to pin the crime on this tiny little sect of Christians who most people didn't care about. And he said the Christians did it. So there was a wave of persecution of the Christians. So for Christians at that time, Nero became emblematic of Roman leaders who, being in league with Satan, persecuted Christians. So the number of the beast is 666, and it is a man, means Nero. And Nero, like Hitler for us, you know, when we say that leader could become a Hitler, we know what we're talking about. We don't mean he's literally going to become Adolf Hitler. We just mean he's going to become evil like Hitler was. 666, Nero, same thing. But they couldn't say it explicitly because they could get caught and arrested. So they put it in code. But the thing about codes is that they can be misunderstood. Long after Rome was gone and Christianity had spread through Europe, Revelation was still sitting there right at the end of the Bible. The Roman Catholic Church kept its imagery alive. It liked the prospect of a final judgment. It was a good way to keep people in line. You better behave, or else you're going to be on the wrong side of judgment when Jesus comes back. That was very useful. So they kept that part. But they downplayed the idea that the end could happen anytime soon. Nonetheless, from time to time during the Middle Ages, when peasants were starving, some priest would get his hand on the Bible, and who could read, because not everybody could read, and he'd say, "The end times are now. The Pope is the Antichrist, and that king who's oppressing us, he's one of the beasts." And peasants would rise and put together big uprisings against the local kings when they demanded bread. People who were persecuted often turned to Revelation for hope, saying, "Aha, the time has come. We will be vindicated." And these people are actually working for the evil forces of the world. Those peasant revolts were called millenarian movements because they wanted to be the ones who were ruled by Christ for that 1,000-year period of peace. But to get there, they needed to battle the evil human rulers who held them down. And not surprisingly, these movements were crushed over and over and over again. America is a nation that was founded by one of those millenarian groups. The Puritans who came over from England, they were millenarians. They felt that they were the pure kind of Christians that God had been waiting for. And they expected America to be the place where the city, the heavenly city, would descend. It would become the New Jerusalem. All they had to do was stay pure. That didn't happen, obviously. But they weren't the last to draw on Revelation for inspiration and consolation. In 1862, it was 1 year after the American Civil War began, it was not clear at all that the North was going to win. The South was strong and the North was worried. In 1862, a woman called Julia Ward Howe, who was a poet, was staying in Washington, D.C., helping with the effort. And one day she saw the Northern troops mustering in their camps, getting ready for a battle against the South. She was certain that slavery was evil and against God's will. She was equally convinced that God was on the North side. So she went home and wrote a poem, which was soon set to a popular tune. And it went like this. It was a rousing tune, and if you look at the lyrics of all of it, it is full of imagery from the book of Revelation. Her poem invokes Revelation to imagine Christ coming in glory and helping the northern army in its battle against the south. And for many centuries, Revelation has been an inspiration to Christians anytime they felt under threat. And this kind of borrowing from Revelation continues into our day today. Evangelical Christians are known for believing that the Bible is meant to be useful right now. It's always about right now. Being careful readers of the Bible, for a long time, American evangelicals believed that the end of the world could only be initiated by Jesus, as it is in Revelation. So a Christian's duty was to live righteously so that we could be ready for when the tribulations began, when the natural disasters started, which God would have initiated. This led many evangelicals to interpret every new earthquake and every new famine and every new flood as a possible hint that the end times had appeared. You may remember from your youth people walking up and down saying, the end is near, the end is near. And it was usually in reaction to some sort of natural disaster which had occurred. But because in Revelation it says very clearly that God would initiate that process, all that Christians could do was wait. That meant that evangelicals, for a long time, until the early 70s or so, felt that they should stay out of politics because that was the realm of society where Satan would exert the most influence. They assumed, based on Revelation, that since only God could initiate the end of the world, all Christians could do was wait, live well and righteously, and keep their heads down. But since the 1970s, a new reading of Revelation has appeared in the United States. It is called dominionism. These Christians believe that the best way to get Christ to return is for Christians to take over society. Specifically, they believe that Christians must take over 7 areas of society, which they call the 7 mountains. Christians must be in control of family, education, medicine, media, government, entertainment, and business. Basically everything. They believe that the existing government has already been taken over by Satan, as predicted in Revelation. As a result, they believe that the current government is corrupt and should be shut down or taken over by Christians. Now, there are 2 things which progressive Christians should know about this movement. First, that it's based on a complete misreading of Revelation. The Bible says very, very clearly that only God will initiate the end of the world. God is not waiting for Christians to take it over first. There's no condition put in place. So the dominionists have created their own faith here, and it is not biblically based, despite what they may say. This is a power grab dressed in biblical clothing. Second, the dominionists have become incredibly influential and powerful. The leading organization of this movement is called the New Apostolic Reformation, NAR for short. One of its leaders is this man on the left, Rafael Cruz, the father of the man on the right, Senator Ted Cruz from Texas, one-time presidential hopeful. Senator Cruz has consistently argued that the Internal Revenue Agency, which collects taxes, should be abolished so that Christians can hang on to their money to be ready to take over. When Donald Trump became president, he appointed Reverend Paula White, a dominionist, as his presidential spiritual advisor. Right at the top religious role in the White House was a dominionist. This picture comes from January 6, 2021, the day of the insurrection. There was a rally in the morning, and then the people at that rally moved on the Congress. On January 6, 2021, she led the prayer at the rally, which preceded that attack, and at the close of her prayer, she stated, "We worship God, not government." And she prayed explicitly that God would send God's wisdom into the minds of the legislatures so that they would overturn the election. Trump's close allies, Roger Stone and General Michael Flynn, are both dominionists. This sect of Christianity has played a prominent role in the overturning of Roe versus Wade and in contesting the legitimacy of the 2020 election. Their assumption that the current government is secretly controlled by evil forces has become very popular among conspiracy theorists like QAnon and small c conservatives. Their influence on the right explains why so many Christian Republican politicians seem uninterested in governing and more dedicated to simply dismantling the government itself. And we saw that recently when there was so much trouble just even electing a Speaker of the Republican House. They think the current government is in league with Satan, so it should just be torn down. Not taken over, but torn down. It also explains why the tone of American politics has shifted from disagreements about the size of government, which is traditionally what Democrats and Republicans argue about. It shifted from size of government to a battle of good and evil. Dominionists and their sympathizers have taken to denouncing leading Democrats like Nancy Pelosi as demons. They actually mean it. All that the government is run by a bunch of pedophiles comes from this. The idea that they are evil, the Democrats are evil, not just wrong-headed, not just a bunch of soft liberals, the kind of criticisms that we used to have in the past, but the idea that they could be evil and demonic, that's coming from this movement, the Dominionist movement. We are witnessing a political revolution inspired by the book of Revelation. The core interest is power, mostly for white Christians. It's being justified by a self-serving misreading of Revelation. While progressive churches may find Revelation embarrassing and out of date, others have weaponized and distorted it. It's critical that we see through these deliberate distortions. Revelation was written by people who saw the state as a source of hatred and persecution. To take that same book and to use it to justify hatred is perverse and wrong. When God sends troubles to the earth in Revelation, we are told each time, and still the people did not repent. In Revelation, God gives the people multiple chances to see through the lies of the evil rulers. Even as the world comes apart, God holds out an olive branch, asking people to renounce evil and hatred. When the heavenly city descends, it is a poetic vision of hope. It imagines a world without strife, where the judgment and disparagement of others has ended. And not because everyone in the heavenly city is exactly the same. We're told explicitly that the saved will be gathered from all nations. People of every color and ethnicity will be there and will live in peace. The book was written as a vision of a world that could work once evil, hating influences had been swept away. By God, not by human beings. At no time does it suggest that the way to love is through hatred. How could it be? The only way to love in God is walking on the pathway of love, that curvy pathway. A beautiful path which can be reached through humility and prayer and openness, offering help and receiving it. If love is to reign in the future, all we can do is ask for some of that love now and practice it the best way we can. To flow with that love, bending with it as circumstances change. If we want to be the saints who gather around the throne of God, love is the way there. That is the great revelation. One still worth listening to and living by. Amen.